G'day, my name is Hayley from Storybrewers Roleplaying and welcome to this video on how to make a playset for Good Society. This video was voted for by our community, so if that's you, I hope you find it helpful and please accept my undying affection. Thank you. The Good Society rulebook does contain some advice for making your own playsets, and that's great for telling you some key considerations, but it doesn't actually tell you how to put the playset together. So that's what I want to dive into today. I'm going to start by talking about my recommended process for making a playset. And this could be any playset from the most simple to the most complicated. And then I'm going to be talking about my top tips for making weird and wonderful playsets that are a bit outside the norm. This could include playsets for the expansions and playsets where you just have a very strong starting story you want to explore. So this video is very much going to assume you know the rules of Good Society. So if you don't, check out our how to play videos first. But before I jump in, I do want to take a quick moment to talk about what are playsets and why does Good Society use them? So playsets contain sets of relationships, desires, character roles, and family backgrounds that players use during backstory to create their characters. And they're usually made for 3 to 5 major characters. Many playsets will also include a spare that can be useful if the players don't like any of the suggested options. Playsets can be used in full, where players use the desires, relationships, roles, and backgrounds that are suggested, or in part, where players use the desires and relationships, but choose their own character roles and backgrounds. So why does Good Society even have playsets? Well, the purpose of a playset is to bring out particular themes, while also helping to achieve a balanced narrative experience during the game. So you'll see the Good Society book includes playsets themed around things such as love and romance, scandal and reputation, and family. So how do you make a playset that brings out a particular theme or play experience while also just working well in play? Well, it really comes down to the desires. Desires, 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 desires. Good Society comes with a lot of desires to choose from. In fact, when you add in the expansions and the Love and Longing deck, there's almost 80 desires in the game. And that's without even diving into Pen to Good Society content. On their surface, desires seem really simple to understand. They're a thing that a character really wants as the story begins. And that character is probably going to spend a decent chunk of the game trying to get it. But desires are actually a lot more than a thing your character wants, especially when you're talking about a playset. They bring out certain themes, and they also imply a whole bunch of things about the character who holds them. So let's take the very first desire in the deck as an example. Restore your reputation and be forgiven by your former friend. This desire implies a relationship, former friend, a reputation status of the character that holds it, bad, and an act taken by that character, a rash act in fact, that caused them to break from their friend and plunge into disrepute. All this from one of the simplest desires in the game. You can see the themes it brings out too. Reputation, friendship, forgiveness. So what about a more complex desire? Well, let's go forward just one desire to desire number 2. Convince your parent to accept you as their legitimate child and declare your relation to all the world. Now this desire is marked as complex and it's not hard to see why. A lot is going on here. It implies a relationship, parent and illegitimate child, an older major character who will be that parent, that the older major character had a child out of wedlock and refused to acknowledge them, and that society doesn't know about the child and their relationship. And what about the themes? Parent-child relationships, biological parents versus adopted family, abandonment, reputation, scandal, wealth, even class perhaps. There's a lot of themes that this desire could play into. So the secret to creating a fun and workable playset is to understand the themes or concepts that you want a desire to bring out and make room to play out its implications. So how exactly do you use your understanding of desires to make a good playset? I'm going to give you the step-by-step process I use when creating a playset to achieve this. And of course, creating a playset is individual, and you can use whatever process works best for you. But I'm going to show you the one that works best for me. So let's jump into creating a playset step by step. So step 1. Choose your themes and shortlist some really good desires that bring those out. Start by choosing 1 or 2 themes or story concepts you want your playset to involve. Maybe I want to create a playset themed around change and upheaval. What does it mean for people to suddenly find themselves in very different circumstances than they were before? Once you've got your theme, shortlist some really good desires that bring that theme out. When I say really good, I just mean you really like them. And you're not going to use all of these, but the ones you do use will become the core of your playset. I could take 11. Protect your younger sibling from all ill and make sure they marry who you choose. This is someone who's adjusting to being head of a household, and the sibling is adjusting as well. 15, save your family from financial ruin so you can break off your engagement. That's a big change right there. You've just become engaged. Or maybe 18, determine your love's true feelings and reestablish your engagement. The big change, your love is back. So I'll amass these together as a shortlist, but I'm not necessarily going to use all of these. And that's where we get to step 2. Choose 1 or 2 desires to be your starting core. And these are the desires that we're going to build our playset around. You don't want them to be too similar. For example, I wouldn't choose save your family from financial ruin and protect your younger sibling from all ill and make sure they marry who you choose, because those both involve a marriage arranged by someone else. So for choosing your core, you can pick 2 desires that you just really like and want to play with, or you can also think about the sub-themes as well. For example, maybe family could be a sub-theme here. I could take save your family from financial ruin to break off your engagement. And I could take determine your love's true feelings and reestablish your engagement, because that's about something that that character's family got them to do in the past. Now, if you need to modify the number of major characters your playset is for, or create playsets for a range of major character numbers, this core is going to remain. And it's become the basis for those modified playsets. So now we have our core. We're going to move on to step 3 and start making choices by fleshing out the implication of our core desires. And I like to plug in stuff into a blank online document as I go so I can see everything in a condensed way, but you can do it physically on the table or in a notebook. And I'll also keep a little note of other ideas on the side. I usually also will take out the cards so I can enjoy some chaos, but you can also have them open in the PDF. So let's start with desire 18. Determine your love's true feelings and reestablish your engagement. What does that tell us about what we need to put in here? This love that the major character has, we want them to be another major character. So that means the relationship needs to be object of affection or old flame. The classic is old flame, so let's use that one. And we also know that the person they love is newly among their acquaintances again. So it makes sense for one of our characters here to probably be a new arrival. And friends and family told them to not go ahead with the engagement, so it might be useful to also have someone from an ill-reputed background. Save your family from financial ruin so they can break off your engagement. Now we have an interesting choice with this one. Are we going to give this person a family relationship and have their intended be a connection? Or are we going to give them the intended relationship and have their family be a connection? Which we do likely depends on the rest of the playset, so for now, I'll just put both in there as options. Now we do know that this person is likely high of status, but low of wealth. So let's give them the peerage background. The person they're going to marry is kind of rich. And it might be fun if they are from an industrial background, so it could be useful to have a new money background in this playset. So you can see here from this example how I've sort of started fleshing out some things that might be in the playset. The next step is to follow some fun thought threads to amass more desire options and start slotting these in and follow these implications to form a draft of your playset. From the decisions we've made so far and the ideas we have, we're going to assemble a few more desire options. And in particular, we can look for stuff that's missing to create a balance. So we might want to make sure we have a balance of romantic and non-romantic desires. We might also look for a balance of people who hold power and people who have power used against them, and desires that could go either way. So for example, a person who is choosing who their sibling will marry holds power. A person trying to get their inheritance back is having power used against them. And this person here we have who is trying to reestablish their engagement. That could really go either way. So examples of thoughts. We have a new arrival. What's their deal? It could be desire number 8, which is to restore their family name and resume their place in society. Or maybe they're the one who wants to get their inheritance back. Now, when we are choosing, it's very important to make sure we avoid obviously reciprocal desires. For example, we wouldn't use desire number 21, marry your child to somebody tremendously rich or of the peerage for this playset, because that's too much of a neat fit with save your family from financial ruin. And it just reinforces the same story beats. We're going to start choosing and slotting stuff in, following its implications. And as we're doing so, one thing to think about is that does each relationship that we put in here credibly have, 1 or 2 options that it could link to? And most of the time, you'll want a playset that works in part and in full. You can't have a desire fulfill a role in a playset that will only work for a certain character role or background. However, I will say people do have pretty good story instincts, and because people will assign their relationships before they choose their character role and family background, it's usually fairly easy to make a playset that's going to work well in part and in full. But also, on top of that, it is okay to say, hey, this playset only works in full. You need to take every single character role and family background as it is, and that's an okay thing to specify as well. Now you'll see that here I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spots for desires. So I don't actually have a slot here for the spare. And a lot of people have asked me about the spare. So the spare really exists to make sure everyone has a choice of desire, especially if you're playing in a game with hidden information. If there's no hidden information in your game, it's really up to you whether you choose to include a spare or not. And indeed, you might choose not to keep the playset more focused. If you do include a spare, it's best to pick one that has a strong independent storyline and relationship pair, and not too many implications about other characters. So something like marry your secret fiance could be a really good fit for that. The one last thing I'd like to talk about is age. So if you're going to have an age gap in your playset, there's something you need to think about. And this could come from a desire labeled age or the dowager character role or a relationship. This person who wants to save their family from financial ruin could have a parent. And if they have a parent, that means there's going to be an older character in here. And what we don't want is for there to be one person with a big age gap from the others who could then lose relevance to the story. So to combat that, if there is only one, they need a desire that's going to give them a lot to do in the story. So you don't want them to just want to marry their child and that's it. If there's another character that has the get your parent to acknowledge you desire, and then they have, a strong desire like restore their family name and resume their place in society, that could give them a lot to do. The other thing to do is to just make sure that the play set includes a similarly aged character. So that could be done by making sure that older major character has a sibling or a romantic love interest who you imagine will be closer to their age as well. So from here, you're going to keep putting your playset together until you have a beautiful, messy draft. So I'm going to continue on and finish off doing that now. All right. So once you have a draft, it's time to move on to step 5, and that is to troubleshoot your playset. And in this step, it's important to make sure that everything is working well together. And we're looking for things like, is anyone going to be stuck with no good choices when they form relationships? Will each of the major characters feel like an important part of the story? Will there be anyone who feels sidelined or left out of the loop once relationships are formed? Will there be enough tension between the major characters? Will everyone have enough to do? Or do any of these desires feel too similar? For me, the absolute best way to troubleshoot is to imagine you are 5 players with these 5 desires and try to allocate relationships in a way that feels good. Imagine yourself if you were each different player. How do you feel about where your character is landed? You should do this at least twice and be able to allocate the relationships into completely different ways. Now, it's important to note that your playset doesn't have to work with every permutation of relationship giving. Of course, there'll be some options that kind of suck or don't really work, but that is something that the facilitator should be able to pick up on and say, let's not go in that direction. And that's fine. However, to be flexible, your playset should probably work with at least 2 permutations of relationships unless you're going for a very specific experience. And let's start with the 2 options we have for our intended. So option number 1 is going to be our new arrival. So the problems that come out of that particular allocation of relationships. Firstly, we've got an unavoidable love triangle because the heir is in love with the dependent. The dependent wants to reestablish their relationship with the cornerstone. Now that might be okay if the group is okay with love triangles. So this is one way that things could resolve. Having an alternative that doesn't involve a love triangle is important too for the flexibility of the playset. The other issue with this particular allocation is that the person playing the hedonist has 2 sort of ambiguous relationships that could end up negative. So they have a rival relationship and they have a sibling relationship, and neither of those necessarily have to be negative, but in the context of them coming in to try to get their inheritance back, it could be something that does end up being a bit antagonistic. So something to watch out for. So let's try the other allocation of relationship that starts with the intended being the heir. And this is actually quite a good allocation of relationships. But similarly to when we had the hedonist in this position, now it's the new arrival that might end up with 2 antagonistic relationships, by having a rival in the form of the dependent and also having a sibling in the form of the new arrival who's trying to get their inheritance back. quick and easy way to fix this is we could consider swapping the rival relationship out. The thing is, we still want something that has a lot of punch. Contextually, having this relationship, for example, be best friends is actually really interesting because the desire is restore their family name and resume their place in society. So having a best friend who is sort of at the bottom of the pecking order kind of puts this dependent in another difficult position, while also creating a positive relationship for this person. So best friends here contextually is likely to be a better choice for this playset. So that was a lot of discussion. So as you can see from this, it might take a bit of fiddling to get a playset right. But when you're done, you'll have a fun and functional playset that should be a bit of fun to use. And you can trust your players to take what you've given them and turn it into an interesting and fun scenario as well. Okay, so I wanted to return to the close-up of my face and talk about weird, wonderful, and super specific playsets. So you've made a playset or 10 before, and now you want to make a weirder playset with a concept in mind. Weird playsets are super fun, but definitely best saved until you've made a few playsets and then actually played with some playsets you've created too. So what makes a playset weird in the way I'm talking about? Well, firstly, if there's more than one desire per player involved, for example, if you're making a playset for sensibility and swordsmanship. Secondly, you're using desires for a different purpose. So say you were using a lifetime desire from Emma Forget-Me-Not as a regular desire. And thirdly, you have a super specific idea or story you want to bring to life. For example, you want to play a game where 4 siblings return home for the funeral of one of their parents, but then you also want to flash back and play out the parents' life story. Weird playsets can take a little bit of a while to put together, but that's part of the fun, right? Messing around with the possibilities and seeing what you're going to create. Here are my top tips for making strange playsets. Keep it mostly simple. So you've got your thing that makes the playset weird, and you might also have some other strange stuff you want to chuck in as part of your concept. Once you put that in there, keep the rest simple. Simple desires, straightforward relationship, and desire pairs. These things are going to make it a lot easier for your playset to come together and for players to pick it up and use it as well when they get into the game. Secondly, if your concept is specific, then don't be afraid to specify. If you're creating a playset for that specific concept, you can put in more detail than you ordinarily would in a playset for Good Society. So if your playset needs 2 paragraphs of backstory explanation, include them. If it really needs 2 specific major characters to be siblings, then just go ahead and make that relationship mandatory and just put it in the playset from the start. If additional details are needed to contextualize a desire, put them in there. It's better that your playset be more clear, even if it's less flexible, because you've created this playset to explore a specific concept. Explore that concept and pop it in there so people can really get into that. The next thing is to watch out for story clusters that can exclude other major characters. So this most often happens when all the other major characters have a stake in something, but one person for some reason doesn't. For example, in a playset about Fey court succession, if there's only one major character that isn't involved in court politics, you can see how this could be an issue. Or in a 4-player playset, if one character is trying to restore the friendship between 2 others, the 4th person might be left out of the loop. So to fix this, and you should be looking out for it in your troubleshoot phase, you can either get rid of the excluding element, or you can do the reverse and just find a way to tie that last character in really well. I did want to add some specific tips for playsets that have multiple desires per player. So this is going to be any playset that you make for sensibility, and swordsmanship, downstairs at the Abbey, or Emma Forget-Me-Not. So when you've got a playset where there are multiple desires per player, the playset is likely to work better if you balance the pair of desires held by each player. The 2 desires should be different from each other, both in their content, but also how they fit into the play experience. So here are some things to think about when doing this. Immediate desires versus long-term desires. So you can pair desires that demand action right now with others that take time to realize, so that person has something to do in the present, but also a desire to pursue over a longer period of gameplay. Pair high and low implication desires. You can pair desires that imply a lot with others that only imply a little. And this works because pairing 2 desires that imply a lot can be too restrictive during backstory, but having one desire with these implications can give people a lot to bounce off. The other thing to think about is major character focused desires versus desires that aren't pointed at another major character. So some desires, like determine your love's true feelings and reestablish your engagement, clearly point at another major character, while others can point at a connection or just society in general. So using a mix of these within each major character's desire pair will mean that people will be equally hooked into the story. So they will have that relationship with another major character, which will help tie them into the bigger story, but then their second desire can link into a connection or not be pointed at a specific person at all. And this means there isn't too much pointing into that one person that they're going to just become the center of everything. So that's everything I wanted to say today about making playsets. I really hope these tips will be useful when making playsets of your own. That said, I did talk a lot today about a bunch of different things. You don't need to worry about making sure you do all those things all the time when you're making a playset. At the end of the day, as long as you take a little bit of time to think about the different desires you're using and how the relationships connect together, it's probably going to be a fun playset to play. And there's also lots of different ways to make a playset, so as you make more, you'll find what works for you. So thanks for watching and playing Good Society, and if you have any Good Society questions or topics you'd like to see a future video about, let me know in the comments section and I will aim to make it happen. Bye!